So when we first began, we talked about Joseph and we kind of came up with a title, Here Comes the Dreamer. And then we talked about him being falsely accused and forgotten. So when we left Joseph last week, pretty much in Genesis chapter 40, he had talked to his God, the chief butler or chief cupbearer, and basically he had told him, hey, when things are well with you, don't forget about me. Remember me and tell Pharaoh about me. And I've been forcefully taken into this land. And also I'm in this dungeon falsely accused. But of course, as people do, and things are going well for them, sometimes they forget very, very easily. And that's kind of how the story is. So we pick up in Genesis chapter 41. We're going to primarily stay in Genesis 41 this week. I know we only have one Sunday left. So next week, it'll kind of be really going through some other chapters, but we'll kind of close in on Genesis chapter 50. And we kind of know things that kind of occurred there with Jacob actually dying in chapter 49, but in 50, he's buried and all those things. And Joseph kind of is now with his brothers and they're absent the father. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see Reuben being, the eldest, but Joseph having such a huge role in just the part of the Israelites and their future and everything and such. And in Genesis chapter 41, picks up in most of the study that I put together is from the NIV version, but I, of course, have the King James Bible just to kind of say a few words differently. Meaning is somewhat the same, but sometimes one has, the NIV is just straight, more plain language speaking, whereas the King James version is kind of more the original text, and also it has a little bit more meaning on certain words. And the chimes, because I'm on the alarm, so if you hear a chime, that's because somebody's coming in the building. I don't know if anyone else has had the opportunity to download the new app. I'll make sure David shares it with you all because we got the new security system in, just cameras around, not to peek on anybody, but we got 2 cameras out. We got 2 cameras out, 2 doorbell cameras, and 2 cameras inside. Just want to make sure everything's good. So at night I look and make sure. On Genesis chapter 41, verse 1, it says, when 2 full years had passed. So, that guy who said that he was going to remember Joseph, he just, 2 years went by, things was going good for him. And, he was just happy to be pouring those cups of Pharaoh. And he didn't want to break the peace. He just wanted to make sure everything was good in his position. And so he 100% forgot Joseph. Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, and the NIV says, ugly and gaunt. I mean, they were kind of, you ever seen those cows that, the farmer's not actually taking the best care of them? They look malnutrition and look like they need to be kind of taken away. I'm assuming this is how these cows look. The first one looked just healthy, looked like they were ready to, go to the show and, of course, turn into, many steaks for us and those types of things, But came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 slick and fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. So you ever had one of those dreams where you just kind of, I don't know what caused it, something's on your mind, maybe you're just tired, maybe you ate too much. In my case, it's often when I eat too much, I have dreams. But these dreams are like kind of intense and they just like wake you up like, and I'm assuming this is kind of how his dream was. He just kind of had this kind of powerful dream. And he's like, what is this? And he woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain, sprouted, thin, and scorched by the east wind. So I'm assuming you've seen those pieces of corn where you're like, I'm not buying that. It's like pieces missing, almost like teeth missing or things of that nature, and just look kind of raggedy. And, these are all just blown to bits by the wind. And then he saw these healthy ones, but then he saw these thin ones. The 10 heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up and it had been a dream. So he had a second dream. And in the morning, his mind was troubled. So, I mean, he had these dreams and he woke the next morning and it kind of stayed with him. It wasn't like this, oh, I had a dream, no big deal. I mean, he was deeply concerned about this. I mean, what did this mean? So, as we talked last week, they have these people who are like dream interpreters. They go to school, they study books. This is like a profession. And they sit up here and they do all these things to just try to figure out the interpretation of dreams. So what Pharaoh does is, so he sent for the magicians and the wise men of Egypt. So he sent for all these men from all over Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one can interpret them for him. So here it is, you have these people who are basically, they study this as a profession. He calls all these people in, magicians, magical people, wise men, and no one can interpret his dream. As we talked about, this guy, this chief butler, this chief cupbearer, he's always around. So he's able to kind of just hear in on the big conversation. He's not a high-level official, but he has a position of servitude where he serves Pharaoh. So he's constantly around. He's like a fly on the wall. He just gets to hear all the stuff. And then all of a sudden, this guy, this chief butler, he kind of shows up in the mix again. Then the chief butler said to Pharaoh, I can just imagine, because 2 years, things have been going good. He got his interpretation from Joseph. He was happy. The chief baker, wasn't so good for him. So he's in the back somewhere. I'm just imagining this, and I'm not adding words to the Bible, but I'm assuming I kind of know a guy. And I really interpret this, him speaking up at this point is because he knows that probably other people knew that Joseph could interpret dreams. And if it gets out that there is such a man that can interpret dreams, and Pharaoh finds out about this, and then he finds out that he knew and didn't tell Pharaoh, he's kind of, I think he's kind of thinking about his head again, making sure it stays attached and he's able to serve those cups. So I don't think he's just all of a sudden thinking about Joseph's well-being. I don't think that's the case. Mr. Troy?
We had good reason to. His buddy got the axe, So.
That's so true. So now he has a reason to now speak up. So he says, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. He admits, he has a fault here. I made a mistake. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants and imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now, a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dreams. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. This is kind of amazing that, now he's kind of bringing this up. He doesn't bring up any part of what Joseph said to him. Remember me when things are well with you. Be kind towards me. I'm falsely accused. I'm in the dungeon. Tell Pharaoh about it. He doesn't remember any of this, but he remembers what's important to keep him in a good light. Says, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
There are two ways of looking at the cupbearer and looking back on feuds that have happened between families. And sometimes it's best just to be quiet, not shake things up. But probably, in my way of thinking, the cupbearer was remembering Joseph, but he was on shaky ground. He had already been thrown in prison one time. He knew he could be there again, but then when Pharaoh had a need, he thought, well, this is the opportunity for me to bring him up.
Yeah.
And he took a chance even then.
That's true.
But it worked out.
That's a really, really good way to look at it, because now, Pharaoh's kind of looking at, I had a dream, I was troubled, and here it is, my cupbearer. He brings me this guy. Man, what a good guy this cupbearer is. That's a really good way. So now he's won some favor, and also he's now elevating Joseph and taking care of Pharaoh's.
Now he's in like Flint.
Yeah. So it says, and things turn out exactly as he interpreted them. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled, the chief, talking about the chief baker. And, he kind of, like I said, impaled. It was a little bit more than that. His head was taken off, he was impaled on the pole and he was eaten by birds, But so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and let me just read something. So the King James Version says, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily. Imagine, so here it is, Joseph, he said, okay, that guy forgot about me, whatever, God's with me. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not going to whine. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to grow where I'm planted. I'm going to be what God has me to be. But all of a sudden, he's in his prison remnants, clothes, and, here he is in prison, and I can only imagine, somebody comes and say, hey, Pharaoh wants you. Oh, okay, appointment. You're thinking you got to prepare. No, right now, hastily. Yep. He wants you like right now. Come on. I can only imagine, Joseph's thought process. What is going on here? Is this it? Am I free? Am I, about to die? Is he, is my family here arresting me? Did somebody provide a ransom? So Joseph, in his mindset, he really doesn't know what's going on. So he's quickly brought from the dungeon when he had shaved, so he had to shave. He changed his clothes, and he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. This is what Pharaoh says to Joseph. And listen to what Joseph says next. Joseph said that I was brought into this country, falsely accused. I want to be free. But that's not what the Bible says. Joseph said, tell me the dream and I'll interpret it. I'm your guy. It's not what he says. He looks at Pharaoh and he's in awe. And because of his position of authority, he's nervous and he kind of becomes sour. So, as I thought about this, and this is the great thing about, just continue to read God's word. You can read the Bible over and over until you leave this earth. And as you read books and chapters and verses, they'll mean more and more and more to you over the years. And I think you probably know that. And I'm going to get to you in just one second. But when you think about what Joseph did here is, it's kind of like you think about the Apostle Paul when he said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, This was a man who was a persecutor of Christians. You think about Joshua, what did God have to say to Joshua after Moses died? How many times did God have to say directly to Joshua, be strong and of good courage? Over and over. He literally had to babysit Joshua to get him going. And then you think about Moses. Moses is the one that basically led them out of captivity from the Egyptians, but Moses is, in the line of Levi. This is Jacob's, third son, Reuben, Simeon, Levi. So Levi's line is Moses and Aaron, the priesthood, Levitical priesthood. This is a lot of what, priestly duties and a lot of religious stuff is based off Levi. But you think of Moses, what did Moses say when, he was told to go before Pharaoh? He was like, I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm nervous. I really don't know what to say. And then Moses got to the point where he said, well, who would I tell him sent me? God said, tell him I am sent you. I mean, not I am God, but I am. You know, that's it. I don't have to put a name at the end to tell him I am sent you. So I'm just at all at what Joseph does right here. You know, he plainly says, I cannot do it. I can't do it. I mean, this was an opportunity for him to say, hey, I can do it. Please let me go. I'll interpret whatever. Where is the nearest exit? But he doesn't do that. He says, I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. So do we give God the just credit that he deserves in our life? Do we do that? Or do we think it's from our might, our strength, our intelligence, our degrees, our strategic thinking, decisions that we made, we plotted it all out, or is it God? I mean, God was with Joseph in his position. It may not have been meant for him to be taken out of the pit right to Pharaoh's castle, kingdom, palace. It may have been meant for him to be, 2 years in prison, 11 years in Potiphar's house. Now, here it is, he's standing before Pharaoh, and he has now this opportunity to kind of talk about these dreams. You know, it's amazing. The same thing that caused him to be tossed in the pit by his brothers is the same thing that's getting ready to elevate him. So I call this lesson the appointment. This is Joseph's appointment that's about to happen, and he doesn't take any of the credit. He gives the credit just duly to God. You know, and that's the most beautiful part about it. And I hope that, you know, in our life, you know, all the things that come our way, you know, happy and not so happy, we give God that just credit in due season. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing at the bank of the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. It seemed like he had a couple of words, you know, scrawny and very ugly. I think he said ugly the first time. I had never seen such ugly cows in the land of Egypt. The lean and ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done this. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. Meaning that they were starving. They ate the fat cows and they still look like they were starving. So, you know, Joseph, you know, he hear this and, you know, it goes from there. In my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and are the 7 worthless heads of grain, scorched by the east wind. There are 7 years of famine. And I mean, only God could have interpreted this, because there's no way Joseph would have known this. I mean, how could he have? I don't even know if he knew. When he was in Potiphar's house, he probably had some knowledge of the political and economic affairs of Egypt, but would he really have known the state of culture and how harvest and all this stuff was going to take place? I mean, there's no way he would have known this, so it had to be interpreted by God. It is just as I said to Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will soon do it. Are there any practical applications we can take from Joseph's interpretation of this dream?
I think that the primary thing with Joseph is that it's amazing that when he ended up in prison, he wasn't bitter. And that attitude of forgiveness allowed him to be elevated in that position.
Yes.
And it's the greatest lesson ever about forgiveness and not bearing a grudge. And he understood that God was his father, that God was in control. And when he ended up in prison, he thought, well, God has a plan. And he waited all those years. And then when it happened, he understood completely that this is my time, just like you said.
Yep.
And that's amazing. And that's a lesson to all of us. We don't bear grudges. And we must forgive. And remember that the Bible tells us we must forgive as we've been forgiven.
That's so true.
My word, nobody understood that better than Joseph.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to, on springboarding off of that, I wanted to reiterate something that Cheryl said last week. We read this story, and we know the end of it. We read that most of us have read this several times, and we know that it has a happy ending, with Joseph and the family and everything and all that, and we read it with that in mind. But Joseph did not know what was going to happen. He just had to trust God each step of the way, and just having to do that, he was, like Marvin said, he was not bitter. He just was faithfully trusting God that God would take care of him no matter what happened. He was just going to do his part.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Irvin, so much for the comments. That's true. We have to forgive. You're right. I mean, I think if Joseph knew the story, he probably would have did all this because he knew that it was going to turn out, but he didn't know. It's just like our story. We don't know our story. We have to just make that best decision as we can. I think one practical application is, I think it's kind of a financial lesson that is kind of embedded in here as well. As we are doing well in certain times in our life, financially or whatever, it's good to save. It's good to prepare for the future because things could not always be so good. I think that's something that, Joseph had that wisdom from God, but I also think he had time with his father Jacob. It's things that Jacob shared with him and showed him and did with him that we, of course, would never know, but I'm sure that he had some time really with his father. You think about it, there's 13 years have passed, and he's not that young man, the one that's kind of like a tattletale or anything. I think what he's ready to do now is he's ready to accept the purpose of his life, what God has placed in front of him. He's ready to step into that role of whatever God's going to have him do. I mean, Pharaoh could have just sat up there and listened to the interpretation. Hey, thanks, I appreciate it. Back to the dungeon. That could have been the end of it, and it could have been another chapter in Genesis, and we could have never heard anything else about Joseph, but that's not the case.
That's so very important for us to understand that Joseph was just like that little child that God describes in so many different stories in the Bible, trusting. And like sometimes we think, well, how could he have been so dumb to brag to his brothers about the dreams and all? Well, he was just like a simple old child. He was just telling them what happened. This is God. This is what God is saying. And even when we're reading it, we have a temptation to say it was kind of dumb. But it was just that simple. This is what God has said. So that's the way we need to be, to have that absolute trust.
That is so true. I'm sure it's times we've done things that are not so smart, and if we had a book about our life and we read it, we probably would be like, Shouldn't have done that. So just a question here. Why does Joseph continue even as the dream has been interpreted? Or why does he not tell Pharaoh what he told the chief cupbearer? Why does he not take this opportunity to say, hey, he's told a dream, interpreted. Why does he not just spawned out, hey, I've been kidnapped, I want to go home? I mean, why do you think he doesn't do that?
He knows that God put him there for that purpose.
I think he's ready to just kind of step into that role and just take on whatever comes next. So verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. I kind of really looked at this right here, and in verse 32, it really ends, the interpretation fully of the dream. But in verse 33, he goes to give Pharaoh like this recommendations. And I don't think he gives him recommendations like, hey, pick me, pick me. I think he's just continuing on with what God has given him. Not only the interpretation of the dream, but what you should do because this is about to happen. That Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take the fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be a greater than you. So Joseph has now been placed in charge of Egypt. And I just can't imagine, I've been promoted a couple times in the military and I got selected for a few jobs, but he's just been brought out of prison. He had to literally shave and change raggedy clothes. Now he stands before the king of Egypt and he says to him, I want to place you in charge of the whole country. I think he's just kind of, just in awe, but, quickly, Joseph goes to work. He full speed ahead. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. What's the big deal about that? If I take my ring off and give it to somebody,
No account.
does that mean anything?
Authority.
Authority? Okay. Ring? Commitment?
Approval.
Approval. Okay. Seal bearer?
Put the ring in a wax or in sealing wax to give their approval. And if it had that ring on it, that means it was approved by whatever office that ring was.
Let's do a little federal government. We got how many branches of government?
Three.
Three. How do we pass laws? They come through what? Well, they come to the legislative, go to the legislative branch, and then they go to the executive branch, and then the executive branch signs them into.
Oh,
Okay. So in those days, you had this ring. Like if I did a decree or law, just like said so eloquently, I put that sealing on it, that wax, and that makes it official, right? So, Pharaoh's not playing. He immediately turns. I don't know if they had to resize the ring. But I do know that he gave him the ring, and basically he's giving him the authority and the power to invoke laws and rules over this country.
And what Pharaoh asked him was the ability to determine life or death.
Right. Yeah.
Complete.
So you think about Potiphar's wife. I'm sure she knows about this. Think about Potiphar. Darn, I should have kept this guy. Never forget. Think about the jailer, you know. Think about the cupbearer.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's profusely apologizing, possibly. You know, he dressed him in robes and fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. I mean, just immediately, they're just like rushing to Joseph and just like a wardrobe change. I don't know if you ever seen like, I like to watch like Great Britain and look at, studying through Queen Elizabeth lineage and all that. You know, she's the second Elizabeth besides King Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I. I'm sure you may know that. You know, they broke away from the Roman Catholic Church because, they wanted the Church of England because King Henry wanted to be divorced and they didn't agree and all. But the point I'm getting to, you think about they have all these royal figures and they have these people come in and dress them and all this stuff. And this is what essentially is happening to Joseph. I mean, he was, he was looking out for other prisoners, taking care of duties and this and that, but now you got people running to him and dressing him and all these things. So in the kingdom of Egypt, they have these people, they call them viziers. And I don't know if you ever heard of a vizier, but this is basically what Joseph had just been appointed to, a vizier. He's basically a prime minister, a president, a chief of staff, commander-in-chief. This is what he is kind of taken over. And just like in Potiphar's house, where Potiphar turned everything over to Joseph, except, he just ate his food. He did all the enjoyment and Joseph dealt with all the stress. So this is kind of what Pharaoh's done. He's basically, hey, you deal with all that famine, all the everything. I'm going to sit here with my family and basically I'm going to enjoy. And God gave you the interpretations. I believe in God, so I think we're going to be all right. Verse 43, he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way." Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Now, as I said, Joseph has become a vizier, but how does one normally become a vizier? Normally in Egypt, there is like a potential second in command, a vizier or something, or they don't have like king and queens in Great Britain like they used to. The king used to be ultimate authority. They went to like regents. Remember, they had like when the king or queen was very, very young, they had like a regent. They kind of ruled and kind of sought the advice of the young majesty or majesty until they kind of got raised at a certain age. In this case, here it is, Joseph, he's a vizier, but normally for someone to be appointed to this position, they had to be a part of Pharaoh's family, like a royal person.
Bloodline
Had to be like a father passed down to a son,
At minimum, you would expect them to be Egyptian.
Yeah. That's a very key point, because they don't even though he's and we'll talk about that next week. It's just certain things they don't do with Joseph because he's not an Egyptian, But also there is an occasion where if a certain individual has a special talent, they can be appointed. So under those grounds, because of his special talent, he was appointed to this position. But of course, we know the reason why he was appointed by God. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift head or foot in Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphaneah-Paneah, meaning the revealer. This is where he interpret Joseph as being the revealer. Joseph was actually given a wife from a priest, and that's where Ephraim and Manasseh came from. And, it talks about in verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, or when he was appointed, the King James Version, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So now he's 30 years old, very prime age, and He's been through all this hardship for 13 years. Now he's in this position. He knows that, even though he may have an inkling of wanting to go back and be with his father, I don't know why he just didn't notify them then, but that's another lesson or something. But he has a responsibility now. He's been given a charge, and he's going to take that extremely serious. He's going to go forth and get immediately to work. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plenteous. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in his cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. I mean, he was really serious. And it's amazing that how this must have been kept on the wraps, because if we knew in this country that, in another 6 or 3, 4 years, or if we even knew COVID was coming, we would have obviously did something different. For a while we got a bunch of masks. Probably so. I don't know. Probably would have. Got a bunch of hand sanitizer. Got some. I'm sorry, I'm going out this room. A bunch of. I mean, this thing seems simple. You just couldn't get that you needed. But if we knew what was going to happen, we would have prepared. But the point I'm making here in Egypt, if they knew what was going to happen, it would have been a panic. I mean, everybody would have been storing up their own food. People would have been like, well, if I'm going to starve in 7 years, I'm going to eat all I can now, because you have people that think that way, And it would have been no way he could have this strategically go around and just store up all this food for these people. The thing that, the Bible, the way this is placed in here, is things in place in Egypt today because of what happened in Genesis. And you know this, the fifth part of the land, only the priests are able to maintain their land. So Joseph stored up huge quantities of food. Okay, before the year of famine came, 2 sons of Joseph was born to his wife, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his first son Manasseh, and it said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household." So, I mean, these days it's people really are starting to take a look at mental health. It used to be a time where people come back and experience whatever, and they just. If you're not showing any kind of wounds on your body, you are fine. They don't care. But mental health is a serious thing. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling ill. I'm whatever. So Joseph had some scars. He had some mental and emotional scars. He says his first child is because of he forgetting all the trouble within his father's household. Some pain that he felt. The second son, the name of Ephraim, he said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." It made it seem like he's a happy-go-lucky type of guy and, full speed, but he has been through some things. It's one thing to go to, court and be falsely accused and you're innocent, but then to be convicted and placed in prison and have no recourse. He couldn't write a lawyer, a justice committee. He couldn't appeal. He couldn't do nothing. All he could do was serve. But now when he's in this position, it seems like when he has his kids, and he has his wife, and now he's kind of has a full purpose, he has a moment to reflect on, what has really taken place within him. As we get into the chapters next week, and really, I don't think full justice will be given into those chapters, but this a sideline into that, his brothers come to Egypt, and then he kind of plays this chess game with them. Oftentimes I read the Bible and got through Genesis, and I just kind of I'm trying to get to the next chapter. I'm reading, I'm trying to understand, I'm taking it in and all that, but I never realized why he really did what he did. But we're going to talk about why he did what he did with his brothers next week, and you probably already know, but it was a reason why he did what he did with them. Kind of not telling them who he was and all those things, and kind of stressed them out, and let them keep money, and I'm kind of giving a lot of stuff away, but it was very interesting, and I kind of looked at it. If you just look at it from this straight gloss view, you're like, oh, he's getting them back. Oh, they deserve it. Oh, go Joseph. Get on them. They put you in that pit. They sold you. They did this. No. He's not. That's not the reason why he's doing that. It's a reason. He's trying to understand something.
I think he's trying to get his brothers to remember themselves. And one of the just a great book that we studied here at one time in the adult class was Finding God in the Rearview Mirror. And that's what Joseph was doing, naming his children. And also his dealing with his brothers. He didn't just dump on them, but he wanted to give them time to remember and to really understand exactly what they had done and what Joseph was doing for them, what God was doing for them. And I think Joseph did everything he could to help them to see God.
So there's no reason for us to meet here next week. We're going to count. I mean, if you didn't hear Irvin said, he said it all for next week. We're still going to talk about it next week again. That is so true. That is so true, Mr. Troy.
Yeah, you touched on this earlier, but I just want to reiterate it. There's a bunch of people who ought to be really happy that Joseph is not the vindictive soul.
Amen.
Because if he was a vindictive soul, there have been a bunch of people with their heads cut off. So that's just the way it was. But in any event, I'm reminded of what everyone was talking about when he was tempted in Potiphar's house by Potiphar's wife. He said, how can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Yeah. And I think that thought that sin is primarily against God or it's against humans. We need to kind of get that in our head. And I think that kind of flows over into what he was going to be doing with his brother. I think he wanted them to see that what they did was really against God.
Amen.
And we're going to talk about that next week, and then we're going to talk about, and just so you know, time's kind of running out. We are pretty much at the end of Genesis 1, but the lesson we'll talk about next week is basically, am I in the place of God? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about next week. Joseph, just kind of, and really, like we said in the first week, Joseph is kind of like a prophet in certain ways, because this words he says, and even when we leave the book of Genesis, Joseph's story doesn't end there. It's a few other things that kind of talks about Joseph, and even in the New Testament, he's made mention of. He's in the household of faith in Hebrews. So we'll get there. But I hope you got something from today. Look forward to seeing you, Lord willing, next Sunday. Let's have a good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Yeah, I used to eat project.
Oh, that was cool. I like that. That's neat. Oh, that's cool. I like that.
And I'll have cups.